It was nighttime in the big harbor. One by one, the lights went out. The bigger tugs all said goodnight over on their side of the dock and went to sleep. Now Theodore and Hank stay on the other side of the dock because, well, they're smaller tugs. "Good night, Theodore," said Hank. "Good night, Hank," said Theodore. "Don't let the dock bugs bite." "Dock bugs? What are they, Theodore?" "Oh, they're just things that float under the dock at night," said Theodore with a sly little smile. Theodore was soon asleep, but Hank stayed up just a little longer. "Dock bugs," he said to himself. "I didn't know those were out there." He nuzzled closer to Theodore. It felt so good to have his friend right there beside him. And soon, he was fast asleep. The next day, the dispatcher sent Theodore to the repair dock for his regular tune-up. Hank went along to say goodbye. "Do you like getting your tune-up, Theodore?" asked Hank. "Oh, sure," smiled Theodore. "I always feel brand new after I'm all cleaned up." "Well, how long will you be gone?" continued Hank. "Oh, a couple of days or so." "Couple of nights, too, huh?" said Hank in a shaky voice. "Sure." "Well, can't you sleep in our dock?" said Hank. "Of course not," said Theodore. "I'll be up in the special dock." "Well, we're here. See you later, Hank." "See you later, Theodore," called Hank in a soft voice. Soon enough, the bright, sunshiny day turned into a dark, moonlit evening. And soon enough, it was time for the tugs to say goodnight. With Theodore gone, Hank had no one to say goodnight to. "Good night," Hank said to himself. "Don't let the dock bugs bite." "Who's there?" said Hank. There it was again, that scary sound. "Dock bugs," he whispered to himself. The words made his engine pound. Hank shivered a little, even though the water was warm. "What's that?" Oh, there was a scary shape right there. "Fodak," said Hank, nudging him. Are you asleep?"
Who? What?"
mumbled Fodak.
"Who's making all that noise?"
grumbled George, waking up.
I'm feeling extra lonely," said Hank. Do you want to tell stories?"
"No,"
said Fodak.
"Go back to sleep, Hank,"
hollered George. Theodore? Hank had decided to visit Theodore up in the special dock.
"Oh, Hank,"
yawned Theodore. "It's you." "Hi, Theodore," said Hank, trying to sound very brave and cheerful. Then he couldn't think of anything else to say.
"Well, how are you?"
asked Theodore.
"Oh, fine,
said Hank.
just fine."
"Well, good," said Theodore.
"Well, good night, Theodore,"
said Hank.
"Good night, Hank,"
said Theodore. That was a very strange visit, he thought to himself.
Hank,
said the dispatcher, waking up.
what's the matter, Hank?
Can you please turn on the dock light? Asked Hank. I just need it on,
Okay, Hank,
said the sleepy dispatcher.
but please, try and sleep.
As soon as the dock light came on, Hank felt a little better, but not much better. It was going to be a very long night. The next morning, all the tugs headed off to work.
Hank,
It was Foduck, looking very serious.
you know you should not be afraid of the dark.
I shouldn't, said Hank.
This harbor is very safe,
Declared Foduck in a firm voice.
day or night.
Well, said Hank, things do seem less scary now.
Precisely, smiled Foduck. And everything is exactly the same at night. It's all very scientific.
Except, said Hank, the night is darker.
Hank,
Said Foduck, frowning a little.
tonight I will show you there is nothing to be afraid of.
Tonight? Repeated Hank quietly. Hank wished it would never be night again. But of course, as long as there's day, night will always follow. And once again, it was nighttime in the big harbor. Who's there? Whispered Hank. Foduck floated over beside Hank.
It's coming from right over there.
Said Foduck. Let's go see. Go see? Chittered Hank. Why?
Oh, come on, Hank. Hank,
Foduck called. Yes? Come on, Hank, said Foduck, pushing the jumpy little tugboat along.
you see, it's just the waves hitting a creaky old board.
Said Foduck, shining his special light. Well, what about that? Shouted Hank. He could barely look at the scary shape.
Just an old pile of junk.
Announced Foduck. You see, Hank? There's nothing to be afraid of. Then how come I'm still scared? Replied Hank. Foduck had no answer for that. He just turned and went back to his place. That night, every little sound made Hank jump, and each scary shape made him jitter. I'm really, really scared now, Hank said out loud, hoping the scary things would just leave him alone. Well, all Hank's noise woke the other tugs. Hank, try counting foghorns, called Emily. 1, counted Hank. 2, 3,
Be quiet, Hank.
grumbled George. Hank felt miserable. He tried everything, it seemed, and he was more afraid than ever. Finally, Hank asked the dispatcher to turn on the dock light again. But it didn't really help much. Just then, Hank heard something moving through the water. Yes, there was something out there, and it was coming straight towards him. Oh no, thought Hank. Oh, this is the scariest thing yet. Oh, he couldn't even look. Hi, Hank. I know that voice, said Hank. He peeked out from under his hat. Theodore, it's you. Of course it's me, replied Theodore. I just got back from the repair dock. Why is the dock light still on? Oh, said Hank sadly. I'm just afraid of the dark. Oh, I used to be afraid of the dark, said Theodore. You were? Said Hank. Well, what did you do? Hank was sure that Theodore was going to tell him to count foghorns or shine his light on things. You know, things that didn't work. Nothing, replied Theodore. I don't think I did anything. You didn't do anything? Repeated Hank. Then, are you still afraid? Theodore thought for a moment. No, he said finally. I guess not. I guess I just grew up a little. Well, just hearing that made Hank suddenly feel much, much better. Theodore, do you think I won't always be afraid of the dark, too?
Probably.
Yawned Theodore.
Good night, Hank.
Good night, Theodore, said Hank. Excuse me, Mr. Dispatcher.
Yes, Hank?
Can you please turn the dock light off? Said Hank. Sure, answered the dispatcher. Good night, Hank. Hank nuzzled closer to Theodore. It felt so good to have his friend right there beside him. Then the two tugs pulled their hats down and went fast asleep. Theodore was watching George pull Shelburne the sea barge out of the big harbor. How far are you going with Shelburne? Asked Theodore.
All the way to the other side of the ocean,
Replied George. How far is that? Said Theodore.
Oh, really far,
Answered George. Theodore knew he couldn't leave the harbor like George. You see, George was an ocean tug, and Theodore was still a harbor tug. I bet I could go across the ocean, Theodore called to George. One day,
Maybe.
shouted George, and he turned toward the open ocean. One day, repeated Theodore softly. One day. The next day, the tugs were all gathered round the dispatcher at the Great Ocean Tug and Salvage Company dock for the morning work meeting.
There is a bellboy just outside the harbor out on the ocean,
Said the dispatcher.
He needs a new bell. I need one tug for the job.
I guess that's you, Emily, whispered Theodore. Since George is away, you're the only ocean tug here.
Theodore, said the dispatcher, please leave immediately.
Me, said Theodore, turning to the dispatcher. But I'm not an ocean tug,
I know, Theodore, said the dispatcher, but you have been doing many important jobs around the harbor lately, and one day you will become an ocean tugboat. This little trip will be your first step, float, so to speak.
Theodore didn't say anything. He couldn't say anything. His engine felt like it was going too fast, though he wasn't moving at all.
You'll do fine, Theodore, concluded the dispatcher. Just remember to hug the coast.
Hug the coast? Does that mean I have to give the coast a hug? Asked Theodore, sounding very puzzled.
No. I meant just stay close to the coast.
A little later, Theodore set off for the ocean. Bedford saw Theodore coming towards him. He was happy Theodore was coming to visit, and he began to ding his bell excitedly. Then, the most surprising thing happened. Theodore just kept sailing right past Bedford. Theodore, called Bedford, where are you going? Oh, I'm an ocean tug now, called Theodore. How wonderful those words sounded to him. Ocean tug. That's great, said Bedford. How far are you going? Theodore didn't answer Bedford. He was too excited. I hope we'll still be friends when you get back, Bedford called quietly. Theodore hurried along, and with each drum of his engine, he knew he was going further and further from the harbor. I wonder how far I am now, he wondered. Theodore gazed back at the big harbor. Somehow, it had never seemed so small before. And somehow he had never felt so big. Now, for the first part of the trip, Theodore remembered he was supposed to stay close to the coast. Look at that strange twisted tree, he said. Everything was so new and different than the same old harbor things he always saw. What a red rock, he said to himself. He saw a small fishing boat who lived in the cove. Hello, he called to the boat. I'm Theodore.
I'm Fundy, the fishing trawler,
Replied the boat in a very deep voice.
I live here in this cove.
I live in the big harbor, smiled Theodore. But I'm going out on the ocean. I'll probably be going all the way across soon.
The ocean wasn't filled in a day.
Said Fundy in his deep voice. And then he was silent again. This boat says strange things, Theodore murmured. He rumbled his engine because he wanted to get going. Well, he said at last, I better be leaving for the ocean. I'm in a hurry. Theodore took a deep breath and turned away from the coast for the first time. Soon, too soon it seemed, Theodore could see a bell buoy. Well, that must be Blandford, he said to himself. I guess this is as far as I get to go. Hello, he called to Blandford. I'm Theodore, the new ocean tug, and I brought your new bell.
Many thanks, said Blandford. Haven't seen you out here before.
Oh, you'll probably be seeing a lot of me, said Theodore. I'll be going across the ocean soon. That's because I'm the new ocean tug.
Do you know Bedford Bowie?
He's a friend of mine, said Blandford. Sure, replied Theodore. But he just lives in the harbor. I probably won't see him much anymore since I'll be out on the ocean most of the time. Theodore turned to head back home, and that's when he saw a surprising sight. There, not too far away, was Owen, the giant oil rig. Now, Owen is Theodore's friend. Well, what's Owen doing out here? Asked Theodore.
That's where he works, replied Blandford.
So that's where Owen goes when he's not in the harbor, said Theodore. Well, Theodore knew he was only supposed to go as far as Blandford, but the thought of visiting Owen made his engine skip a beat. Theodore pooted up a puff of smoke that announced,
Theodore, the ocean tug, just crossing the ocean some more.
And he was on his way. Well, Owen was a lot further away than he looked, and by the time Theodore pulled up beside him, Theodore was puffing away as tired as can be.
Say, if that isn't Theodore Tugboat,
Boomed the big rig.
Yes, sirree, Bob. Well, what are you doing way out here?
Oh, puffed Theodore, just being the new ocean tug.
Ocean tug? Bellowed Owen. Hey, isn't that something? Oh, yes, indeedy do. Great being out here on the ocean, isn't it? So nice and quiet.
Theodore grinned. It certainly wasn't quiet anywhere Owen was around.
Nothing like the ocean for adventures, Owen continued. Why, I remember the time I was drilling out here for oil and I dug up a giant octopus.
Theodore tried to think about his ocean adventures. Well, I remember the time, he began slowly,
that I brought Blandford a new bell.
Well, those two began to talk, and somehow the time just seemed to slip by. Before Theodore knew it, it was getting dark. I guess I better be getting home, Owen, said Theodore finally.
Come back and visit soon, roared Owen.
Oh, I will, called Theodore. Theodore set off again towards the big harbor. But then he slowed down. With a shiver, he realized he didn't know where the big harbor was. I think, said Theodore to himself, I think I've gone too far. Theodore didn't know his way home. The water under his hull felt deeper. All around him, he saw nothing but ocean. Did the ocean suddenly get bigger? He wondered. that ship must be going toward the harbor. Theodore turned to start following the ship.
Theodore?
It was Owen again.
If you're going to the harbor, it's the other way.
Owen hollered. Oh, that ship must be going further out on the ocean, said Theodore.
Yes, sirree, Bob.
Boomed Owen. I didn't know the ocean was so big, he said softly. I hope I can find my way home. Finally, Theodore could see Blandford Buoy. Then he stopped again. Now which way do I go, he wondered.
I thought you were going back to the harbor,
said Blandford. I was, replied Theodore. I mean, I am. Blandford, where is the harbor?
Oh, just hug the coast and you'll be home in no time,
shouted Blandford. Hug the coast, Theodore said to himself. That's what the dispatcher said. Theodore looked around, and sure enough, there was the coast. He set off again, already feeling a bit better. Well, by the time Theodore reached the coast, he was so very tired, it felt like his anchor was dragging and his bumpers had blisters. At last, there was the little cove where Fundy lived. Do I go this way, wondered Theodore, or that way?
If a tug goes a-travelin', he won't come home a supertanker,
Fundy said in his deep, deep voice. I wonder, Theodore thought to himself, if Fundy means that I should go home the same way I came. Theodore looked along the coast and saw a red rock, and beyond it, the giant twisted tree. I know that rock, he said. I passed it on the way here. Theodore set off towards the rock. Hug the coast and I'll soon be home, Theodore repeated to himself. Oh, how terrific those things looked to Theodore. Even better than the first time he saw them. Somehow, he didn't really know why, but Theodore had the feeling that while he was hugging the coast, that coast was hugging him right back. And that was a nice feeling, a feeling of being safe. Safe and almost home. Finally, Theodore heard a very special sound. Bedford, he shouted. I saw a twisted tree, a giant rock, and a funny fishing boat, and Owen was there, and a ship was leaving for the ocean, and Blandford says hello. The words came tumbling out of Theodore's mouth so fast he didn't even have time to stop for a breath. Oh, it sounds great, said Bedford. Theodore stopped. It had been kind of great, but it also felt so good to be back in the big harbor. He looked at his good friend, Bedford. You know, said Theodore, the greatest thing I saw all day was you, Bedford. I missed you too, Theodore, said Bedford. I guess next time you'll go really far. Oh, smiled Theodore, maybe just a little way at a time. That's okay, isn't it, Theodore? Said Bedford. It sure is, Bedford, smiled Theodore. It sure is.